Hello, everyone. This is Bhargav Reddy for APAC Assistance. I work as their regional manager. We have with us today our CEO and director, Paul Quaglia. Today, we'll be discussing major developments in East Asia Pacific. We'll be looking into how these major issues affect multinational businesses and their operations in the region. For today, we have two major issues to discuss. First being Mimika Regent's request for temporary closure of Freeport mine, and the other being the upcoming no confidence motion in Malaysia. To get on with it, I would like to invite Paul to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Paul Quaglia, the founding director of APAC Assistance. And look, swinging into the points that Bhargav raised, firstly, the massive mine in Papua Indonesia. There's a lot of macro politics going on there. The mine is now 51% owned by the Indonesian government. The Mimika Regent Eltinus Omaleng, he's basically urged Joko Widodo, the president of Indonesia, to close Freeport mine based on that the company with roughly 17 to 20,000 employees and contractors, which already has those 56 employees suffering from COVID-19 and also one death, to close down the mine. Now, the bigger picture here is very, very interesting. That Freeport, of course, is saying it's okay, we can conduct operations contractually. They're in charge of operations in the mine. But underlying this are two greater issues. The first one is there is that political, what would you say, imbalance between the Indonesian government and the Papuan government, which has a very strong autonomous government. Historically, Freeport and Jakarta in particular have taken a lot of funds out of the mine. And if you go to large towns such as Parti and Quaglia within the mining area of operations, there's still Papuans living in a lot of poverty. Now that the Papuan politicians, such as the head of the Regency, Eltinus Omaleng, as I mentioned, but also the governor of Papua, they have a lot more power now. And with Freeport being owned by Indonesia, and of course they represent the Indonesian government at that provincial level, but they're also Papuans and would like a better deal for Papua, there is much greater forces whereby leverage can be exerted against Freeport. Underlying this, of course, is the major security issues that Freeport's having. Most recently, the killing of a New Zealand citizen, Graham Wall, in the lowlands, in an area that was previously considered to be quite safe. Freeport have largely stated that this doesn't represent a shift in the security paradigm because they've always had issues there, but the underlying security measures and security preparedness in Freeport would indicate that they aren't prepared for armed insurgents to come waltzing into their lowland administrative town. So in short, this political posturing by the region of Mimika, and perhaps he's just sensible approach to get a lockdown and to make sure that the Papuan lives are protected in the Regency, is a greater consideration than the commercial ones, is something that's going to be very, very important as we move forward. Bhargav, any questions from you before I move straight on to the Malaysian issue?
Yes, Paul. Would you say the request for temporary closure comes in a little late, given that more than 50 employees of the mine have tested positive?
I don't think so. I think that the regent, or as they're called locally, the Parti, he's very senior, of course, the most senior of the trilogy of power, or Trikora, which is army, police, and government. The most senior figure is the Parti. However, in Indonesian politics, when you consider the size of the parliament in Indonesia, he's quite junior. So he has to have a valid case before going and presenting something to Jakarta, and particularly to the president. Furthermore, when you look at the scheme of things, how many tests are being done in Indonesia, which frankly isn't many, and there's a lot of undetected viruses and perhaps undetected deaths. Freeport does have one advantage, and that is it does have very good private medical facilities and can test, but it also needed to have enough of impetus to elevate it, Bhargav.
Paul, would you suggest that the onus is largely on Freeport as a multinational responsible business to insist on taking extreme precautions to continue the mine, rather than say give a perfunctory statement like they have higher protocols already in place? Do you think they are being lackadaisical in their approach?
This is why it's such an important issue, because we saw from the reaction at the shooting, Freeport has a very well polished machine when it comes to responding to these issues, because it's all about maintaining production at any cost. So whether it's a safety incident, a safety fatality, shooting of an unarmed expatriate fatally killed, there's other Indonesians injured, the show must go on from a commercial perspective. So having protocols in place, the onus on Freeport, it's quite a paradoxical situation. If you look at the environmental issues or the waste management on site at Freeport Mine or any of the big Western owned or high degree of shareholdings, they have much higher standards from an environmental perspective. However, where the clash can come is you've got three powers. You've got Freeport wanting to maintain commerce, the Indonesian government wanting to, maintain commercial flow, but also not be embarrassed if this virus got out of hand. And if you look at the parallels, say, between the dormitories at Freeport, particularly in the highlands, milepost 74, where you've got several thousand employees living in close dormitories in low, wet, cold conditions at an elevation of 15,000 feet, which is an ideal breeding ground for this virus. I mean, compare it to the dormitories in foreign workers are residing in Freeport, where they're having anywhere between 600 to 1,200 infections a day. Such a situation at Freeport could be catastrophic for their operations. So I am surprised that Freeport hasn't taken a more vigilant approach and let out a much more significant plan on how they're going to deal with this number of 56 patients, because that could get out of hand really quickly. Freeport has a history of being very, very reactive and indeed nonchalant and dismissive in managing risk. So where it goes is going to be very interesting. And of course, you've got the government wanting to maintain a professional approach, and you've got the Papuan, not only the Bupati or the regent, but also the governor wanting to make sure they seem to be protecting the rights of Papuans. Obviously, there's been a very, very long and protracted case of human rights challenges by Papuans, not only for issues of public health, but a lack of education, often a very, very aggressive stance from the government. So this is a precarious situation, and more so because it's on the back of a recent fatality a month ago, where a foreign executive was shot, murdered by an armed group.
Thank you for your insight, Paul, on the Papuan issue. At this point, I would like to communicate to our listeners that we have an in-depth analysis of Papuan situation, and you can reach out to us for any assistance in Papuan region. And Paul happens to be a foremost expert about the region and the multinational businesses in Indonesia. So moving forward, Paul, can you please comment on the current situation evolving in the political arena in Malaysia? Both former Prime Minister Mahathir and his political partner Anwar have assured that they will restore Pakatan Harapan government, and in fact, they hold the majority in parliament.
So look, this is fascinating, repetitive but fascinating. So the key thing here is Mahathir is a very, very astute politician. Anwar Ibrahim is popular because he represents reformation in the country, but Mahathir is a lot more savvy politician. So we have to look at both recent and longer term history to understand the complexities here. Mahathir was the president for decades. Anwar Ibrahim was then shaping up and indeed won an election, but was basically put into jail on what most Western pundits believe was trumped up sodomy charges. Ultimately, and I'm skipping a lot of complexity here, but ultimately Mahathir and Ibrahim decided to team up to win back power for Mahathir on the back of a massive 1MDB scandal where a quick $1 billion US plus was basically siphoned from the nation coffers and hidden behind a present. So it gets even more farcical. Recently, Mahathir resigned. Yassin, who's of the same political party of him, took over. And then Mahathir and Anwar have decided that that a parliamentary majority doesn't exist and they want to re-challenge for power. So you've had this farcical political situation of resignation, sodomy charges, broken promises, and now another reunification. And of course, when I refer to broken promises, Mahathir had said that he will take power for a couple of years and then hand it over to Anwar Ibrahim and then reneged. So Mahathir and Anwar, it's the clearest thing to come out of this is there's a synergy of power and they both need each other. The problem is that Anwar Ibrahim's not the most savvy of politicians, puts himself into vulnerable positions, doesn't hold his ground and doesn't seem to be able to play this mystical political games, whereas Mahathir is the master of it. So, I mean, all we can do now is sit back and look how it unfolds. If you are betting on a racehorse, you'd have to say that the form guide is with Mahathir. He's a very savvy politician. It's when he decided to make the comeback and team up with Anwar, you know, we predicted much before any of the pundits that he's going to win just because he's a famous racehorse. You'd have to back him again, though the kind of inconsistency shown of late, is he losing his touch? Has he promised, or sorry, has he delivered on his election promises? Is society considering him too old? Has his recent resignation perhaps tarnished his name? Now, obviously, this isn't a populist vote. This is happening in the hallowed turf of Malaysian Parliament. So we'll just have to see how it unfolds. But what it does indicate is that Mahathir is prepared to have another go. That Malaysian politics is in a real mess. It does indicate that Ibrahim and Mahathir need each other. Perhaps the country needs them more than a return to UMNO, but we can only wait to see where this goes. Certainly, there's nothing as prevalent as a rising risk paradigm like in the Freeport area. But on the backdrop of what's happening in COVID-19 across Asia Pacific and supply chain issues, food supply issues in countries like India, Pakistan, this is kind of quite insignificant, except for multinationals that have a very, very large presence in Malaysia. So, Bhargav, any questions on that quick overview?
Yes, Paul. Paul, do you think such a political drama happening in such an extreme emergency post-COVID-19 response situation will have an impact on the responses as well as the multinational companies?
Look, I don't think so, because basically what's happened is Mahathir has proposed to the Speaker of the Parliament, Mohamad Yusuf, that they propose a vote of no confidence. Now that's at some point in the future. It depends on his timing on that. Certainly we're not in a post-COVID-19 situation now in Malaysia. In fact, nowhere near it. The Malaysians are being uncharacteristically careful here. But I think most multinationals that are well established in Malaysia know well that the Malaysian wheels of Parliament turn turn, churn, and ultimately burn. But fundamentally, we will just have to sit back and wait this out, as will Western multinationals. I think the fact that they're already largely in a lockdown, those in manufacturing and many other sectors, the service sector in particular, and particularly the hospitality sector, they're already in a state of limbo. Nothing much is happening. So right now, I don't see this as an issue. Of course, the timing of when COVID-19 measures of any significance can be eased will be important. But at this stage, I don't see much of an impact to multinationals that hasn't already occurred through COVID-19 from this political wrangling, at least. Okay.
Thank you very much for the insight, Paul. That's all we have for today. Thank you for joining us. You can contact APAC Assistance at Bhargav_Reddy at apacassistance.com for more focused insight on any issues that are critical to your operations. An in-depth assessment can be tasked by our membership clients on any issue of your concern.